If you've read The Anxious Generation or even just heard about it, you probably felt something shift. Maybe it confirmed what you'd been feeling for years. Maybe it gave you language for something you couldn't quite name. Maybe it scared you. And then you closed the book. More informed, but somehow more stuck because you still didn't know what to do with your teenager. Not teenagers in general, not the generation, but yours. The one sitting across from you at dinner, the one you're worried about right now. Information about a generation isn't the same as direction for your kid. And that's not a failure of the book. That's the gap the book was never designed to fill. And that gap is what I want to talk about today. I'm Dr. Lem Yusita. I hold a doctorate in education, and I've spent over 2 decades studying adolescent identity formation, how teenagers develop a sense of self, and what helps or hinders that process. And here's something worth knowing about where I'm coming from. My doctoral dissertation was completed in 2009. I was researching how adolescents form identity in online space before Instagram existed, before the teen mental health data collapsed, before anyone called it a crisis. I wasn't reacting to a cultural moment. I was watching one build. So when The Anxious Generation came out and sold 2 million copies, I wasn't surprised by what it said. I was grateful someone with that platform said it, but I also knew what it didn't say. And that's what I want to give you today. Jonathan Haidt did something important. He looked at the data, the mental health data, the social media data, the generational data, and he named what was happening at scale. The shift from a play-based childhood to a phone-based childhood has corresponded with a significant decline in adolescent mental health. The research is real. The concern is legitimate. And he made the case that this isn't just a parenting problem, it's a collective action problem, one that requires parents, schools, government, and tech companies to come together. That argument needed to be made, and he made it compellingly. But here's what epidemiology can't do. It can't tell you the neighborhood is flooding. It cannot tell you about your specific house. The anxious generation tells you something is wrong with this generation, but it doesn't tell you where your teenager is now. It doesn't tell you whether your kid is drifting, moving from identity to identity without committing to any of them, and what that actually needs from you. It doesn't tell you whether your teenager's certainty is something to celebrate or something to worry about. It doesn't tell you whether the questioning and pushing back you're watching is a crisis or development doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It doesn't tell you what your specific teenager needs from you in this specific moment. Now, that's not a criticism of the book, that's a description of its scope. Haidt diagnosed the problem at the population level. What parents need is a framework at the individual level, a map of your house. Here's what happens when parents receive alarm without a framework. They restrict, they confiscate, they get anxious, they set rules. And sometimes that's the right call. But sometimes a parent is restricting a teenager who is doing exactly what adolescence is supposed to look like: questioning, exploring, trying things on. And the restriction doesn't help the information. It just drives it somewhere the parent can't see. And sometimes a parent is celebrating a teenager who looks completely solid, certain, compliant, clear on who they are, without realizing that the certainty was never earned. It was borrowed, and borrowed certainty doesn't hold when real questions arrive. Alarm without a map doesn't tell you which situation you're in. It just makes you more anxious. And anxious parenting, however loving, often responds to the wrong thing. This is the part I want to say carefully. Not to compete with a researcher I respect, but because it's relevant to what I'm offering. In 2009, I completed and defended a doctoral dissertation on adolescent identity formation in online space. The iPhone had existed for 2 years. Facebook was for college students. Instagram didn't exist. And I was writing about how digital environments were going to complicate the developmental work teenagers need to do, specifically the work of forming an own sense of self. I was using James Marcia's framework for identity development, built on decades of research, to ask, what happens to formation when the online world becomes part of the adolescent's environment? The answer I found then is what every parent is living with now. I'm not telling you this to establish a credential. I'm telling you this because it means the framework I'm about to share with you wasn't built in response to a crisis. It was built before one, and now it's more useful than ever. Here's a framework Haidt didn't give you. What I want to offer parents who feel equipped with alarm but not with direction is what I call the formation framework. It comes from James Marcia's research, one of the most validated frameworks in developmental psychology, translated into plain language parents can actually use. And it starts with two questions. How much genuine exploration is happening in your teenager's life? Real wrestling with who they are, what they believe, and what kind of future they want, and how strong their commitments. Is there a settled own sense of self forming, or are they performing one? Those two questions produce four positions, and knowing which position your teenager is in tells you something no book about the anxious generation can tell you. What does my teenager need from me right now? So here are the four positions. The floater, low exploration, low commitment. Not a character flaw, usually a sign that the conditions of safe exploration haven't been in place. More access to screens deepen the drift. What's needed isn't pressure, it's safety. The performer, low exploration, high commitment. This is the teenager, the anxious generation should have spent more time on because they look fine, they look great, but the certainty is borrowed, not built. And borrowed certainty is what breaks in college dorm rooms at 2 a.m. when the questions finally arrive. The seeker, high exploration, low commitment. The position that panics parents, also the healthiest position for a teenager to be in because it means the work is happening. Shutting it down doesn't stop the exploration, it just relocates it to a different space and a different time. Usually to somewhere you can't see with people you don't know without you in the room. The rooted, high exploration, high commitment. Not a finish line, not something you force. The early signs of a teenager who has genuinely wrestled with the questions and arrived at something that feels like theirs. And here's something most parenting books skip, including Height's. Skip entirely. Your teenager's formation doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in relationship with you, the adult whose own formation they're watching, whether you realize it or not. The floater often has a parent who never fully settled their own questions. The performer often has a parent who modeled borrowed certainty as the goal. The seeker often has a parent who shut down their own wrestling before it was finished. And this isn't blame, it's formation data. The most powerful thing you can do for your teenager's formation is to take your own seriously, which means the question isn't only where's my teenager now, it's also where am I? The teenager, the anxious generation is most worried about is broadly the one being shaped by the phone. But the teenager I'm most concerned about isn't the obvious one. It's the performer, the one who looks solid, who says the right things, who gives parents and youth pastors and teachers no reason to worry, and who has built an identity entirely out of borrowed material with no framework for what happens when it's questioned, because it will be questioned. And the phone didn't cause that fragility. The absence of genuine exploration did. Now, Haidt asked, what is this generation of technology doing to our teenagers? And that's the right question at the population level. But the question that changes how you parent isn't about the generation. The question is, where's my teenager right now? Not compared to a generation, not measured against a mental health statistic. Where are they in their formation? What do they need from me? Not what does every parent need to know, but what does this kid need, my kid, in this moment from me? That's what a framework gives you that alarm alone cannot. Not more anxiety, but direction. If the anxious generation names something you were already feeling, I'm glad you're here. That alarm was appropriate. What I want to give you next is somewhere to put it. The free identity formation assessment at identityspecialist.net/assessment takes 5 minutes. It shows you where your teenager is right now across exploration and commitment. So the alarm has somewhere to go. The Formation and Phone series on this channel goes deeper. 5 episodes on what each position looks like, how digital access interacts with formation, and what parents can actually do. The link is in the description. And drop a comment below. Did you read The Anxious Generation? What did it leave you with, and what did it leave unanswered? I read every comment. Thanks again for watching. I appreciate you taking the time. And as always, don't forget, be unique, but belong.